Morning, this is Monday's weekly update, and today we're going to start with the satellite imagery just to see what's going on at the present time before we move into the models and get an explanation on what's happening and what's going to happen in the future days ahead. So at the moment, there's an upper level low sitting over southeast parts of the country. It's influencing thunderstorms across New South Wales, the ACT and eastern Victoria. It's up below. There's limited moisture here, which is leading to more so gusty winds, pockets of heavy rain and some large hail through this area. Heavier rainfall down further south through the eastern states, and there's severe weather warnings active across southern New South Wales, the ACT and eastern Gippsland. It falls within these are 10 to 30 mils. Severe storms might give you 50 odd mils. These are occurring right now. This is a current satellite loop to the present time. And in the north, there's this monsoon that's been stubbornly persistent, particularly over Queensland since the end of January. There's a embedded low moving through the Gulf and into the Gulf country at the moment, which is enhancing rainfall across the top and the far north of Queensland once again. There's also a small embedded eddy that's just moving offshore the Townsville coast at the moment. We've had some very heavy periods of rainfall overnight tonight. Actually, I've heard it coming down in heavy bursts on and off for several hours. This low pressure system out in the Coral Sea, it's on its way towards New Caledonia still, so there's still no change in future progressions through the Coral Sea with this New Caledonia region, the magical pathway, so to speak, of future progressions of any tropical systems, and that's mostly due to the monsoon trough being situated there. And the steering influence, we've got a strong northwesterly versus a slightly weaker southeasterly, so you will get that southeast motion overall, where the northwesterly is slightly stronger than the easterly below it. Then we have soon to be Zelia, which is forming pretty much right where we wanted it to. The bomb now has shifted its coastal crossing track just to the south of Port Hedland towards Karratha, and the long range forecast has highlighted that Port Hedland to Onslow region for a crossing. Crossing's looking like being about the 14th of the month, which is 4 days' time. The high energy period runs from the 8th to the 12th, so we're seeing that it's still within a couple of days of the long range forecast period. Development and intensifications within the window and landfalls within the window, so for what it is, it's still quite reliable and within the scope of the development of this service. Rainfall's beginning to build up across the top end. It's not quite as favourable as it should be for this time of year, as particularly with this tropical low, soon to be cyclone forming and moving away to the southwest, because it'll essentially pull the moisture away from the Darwin region. And once this low in the Gulf and across Queensland starts to move offshore, the same thing will happen in northern Queensland, and we'll move into a monsoon break phase. I think this will be the catalyst for that monsoon to release from the northern parts of the country. It's regarding the east, it's a few days behind schedule for me. I'm a bit particular. I expected it to happen from around the 5th, and that's when I expected these low pressure systems to move offshore, which they have been doing. But with the monsoon remaining active through the Gulf and the top end, it just keeps spawning new areas of low pressure, which keeps re-enhancing this monsoon trough and rainfall across North Queensland. So there's still another day or two of heavy rain for North Queensland, particularly into the 12th. So the 8th to the 12th obviously is the peak energy phase, and it's sort of aligning when this next current low moves offshore around the 12th, Tuesday, Wednesday, and that's going to be the peak rainfall as we get this next convergence span moving to the coast there. Not a lot through the south still very dry. There is a weak trough moving through southern Western Australia there, but obviously you can see there's no moisture in it. There is an upper trough due to move through from around the 19th to the 22nd, so that'll be your next opportunity of rain for the south, through southern West Australia and parts of South Australia. And it's somewhat connected to the path of whatever's left of this tropical cyclone. So that still looks on track. Moisture will be determined by the exact timing. If this feature can move south fast enough into around the 19th before this upper trough moves through, that would be most favourable to bring all that moisture back through the south of Western Australia into South Australia. The moisture that's within this system, it's doubtful it'll reach Victoria, especially Western Victoria and Eastern South Australia. But it's definitely the next system to watch in the longer term for rainfall. So that's pretty much the satellite. Obviously, all the action's happening up in northern parts during what's nearly the peak of the wet season, and then we've got this upper low over southeastern parts of the country. The next charts I'll just put up the wind stream lines through the week so we can see the progression of each feature, and then we'll move on to actual rainfall and where it should occur over the week ahead. This is surface level winds at the present time. So this is Monday morning, 6 a.m. There's a weak coastal trough along the southeast coast, and this is being enhanced by the upper level low. If we go to the 500, this is 5.5 kilometres up. There's an upper level low here creating all the lift and instability. Then we've got a mid-level trough feature coming in from the northeast, bringing moisture in from the tropics, and this is enhancing the rainfall through the southeast of New South Wales. There's severe thunderstorm warnings active through parts of the Riverina, central west slopes and plains, central tablelands, southern tablelands into the Illawarra coast, in through here. And this is where this convergence zone is in the mid-levels, and that feeds into the centre of this upper low where there's divergent air, so air's rising really quickly, and that's allowing the moisture to cool rapidly, and that's where you get your severe thunderstorms. The storms are warned for locally intense rainfall, damaging winds and large hail. So with this lift mechanism in the upper levels, it's generally what produces your larger hail that keeps relifting the air, allowing it to refreeze. So this particular feature in the southeast just meanders about into the 12th and slowly shifts to the north. So this is part of this high energy period to the 12th before it sort of moves offshore, breaks down. So you'll see storms persist in the southeast for the next few days associated with this upper low. And you can see a broader system moving into Western Australia over the next few days as well. So this will be the next feature to watch for southern areas. There will be limited moisture associated with this until this tropical cyclone moves in from the northwest. So we'll see a weak feature move across the southeast within the next few days. The southwest. However, there's limited movement in the lower levels, so there'll be nothing of interest to happen there until we move further forward into the forecast. We're watching this tropical cyclone moving down into the Onslow region. This is when the next upper level trough should be moving through by around the 19th, which will redirect this feature here. This is the upper trough capturing the remnant tropical cyclone, which feeds it in through the southern interior there. And that's in the long range forecast week 4 map, which I'll show at the end of this video. And you'll see the progression of how that low pressure system is redirected through the southern states there. In the north, there's the obvious monsoon trough, which we've been talking about for a while now. And you can see this is the current tropical low, which will be Zelia. This is the rotation that's moving in through the Gulf of Carpentaria, and this is the monsoon trough you can see running through the Northern Territory through Queensland into the Coral Sea towards New Caledonia. So this is the feature that's about to stir things up for northeast Queensland, from the North Tropical Coast down to possibly the Mackay area. There'll be another period of very intense rainfall. Daily totals of 300 to 500 mils are quite probable for this area. A lot of the rainfall with this tropical cyclone will be highly coastal for the Kimberley coast. But once the system starts to move towards the coast of the Pilbara, we'll see rainfall wrap up into Broome area. Again, highly coastal, more so winds along the coast. It'll be a problem for the Kimberley and Pilbara prior to landfall. And the bomb's got this as a Cat 4 on landfall, which is it's up there for tropical cyclones. The Pilbara's quite used to seeing storms of this calibre, but it doesn't take the intensity out of them. We've got winds up to 200 odd kilometres an hour moving into landfall. So this is a serious storm. People on the Pilbara coast should be watching this. There's a lot of mine sites in this area, and they're quite cyclone proactive. I've worked in the Pilbara over the years. A lot of them have their own cyclone shelters on site for this exact reason. The only problem will be if there's any major disruptions to power and supplies and transport routes. Again, this area's quite used to it, so providing that they've taken their precautions, everything will be okay. Western Australia, especially for this mining area. Only major threat over the next few days will just be severe storms through southeastern parts of the country, with this upper low moving through New South Wales from Victoria. And they'll just be local thunderstorms, heavy rainfall, damaging winds, and the risk of large to quite giant hail, especially with that upper low in operation. And then the secondary threat will be the tropical cyclone for the Pilbara coast, as well as intense rainfall for the northeast Queensland coast. And the peak date will be around the 12th to the 14th for both rainfall in the northeast and the tropical cyclone in the northwest. So this will be the weekly rainfall outlook for Australia. These will be 24-hour increments. This is how I traditionally would do it, and draw on the maps so you can see the rainfall for the day in total rather than rainfall progression through the day. So we see for today, the bulk of the rain will be through East Gippsland, mostly east of the ranges and across the tablelands, and this is due to the thunderstorms with the upper trough. There's the upper trough and upper low situated over much of inland New South Wales and Victoria. With the centre of the low itself, you can see why these dotted lines are quite hard to make out, but the centre of the low is around in here through the eastern Riverina. So we'll see storms building through inland areas where there's not much moisture, and we saw that on the satellite, but these storms, especially up in the northern parts, they're sort of the spawning area. There's not a lot of moisture available there. There'll be gusty winds and maybe some hail, but nothing of substance up through the northern parts of the central tablelands and the northern tablelands. Rain will mostly be about the Hunter, mid-north coast, northern rivers, northern tablelands. Sorry, that's the northwest slopes. And through to the southwest slopes, ACT and East Gippslands. And you'll see that there'll be some quite good falls within this system, but being storms, they will be hit and miss. Once again, the bomb's got these storms warned for very dangerous thunderstorms with intense rainfall, locally intense rainfall, damaging winds and large hailstones. This is the current warning for storms. And observed rainfall is in that 20 to 50 millimetre range, and some of those is coming down within 30 minutes. So that's a lot of rain in a short period of time. Despite it only being 20 or 50 mils, in half an hour that produces some quite significant flash flooding, and particularly with this area hasn't seen a great deal of rain lately. The ground will be quite dry, so there'll be some quick runoff before it gets a chance to soak in. So it's not really beneficial rain. Anything's beneficial really, but the way it's being presented isn't in the most favourable outcome. And then, in the north, we got a similar sort of a setup where we're getting, especially I'm up here in Townsville, we're getting extreme rainfall on top of absolutely soaked soils. So the flash flooding here is phenomenally fast. We'll get just what's normally showers, and the creeks and streams start flowing again as if we've had a severe storm. So the bulk of the rain today will be through the northern Gulf country, parts of the Cape, and through to the North Tropical Coast and Herbert Burdekin region. It honestly has not stopped raining here since pretty much the 29th of January when this high energy period first kicked off. And rainfall, you can see, is not as thick through the top end, and that's mostly due to this tropical cyclone that's forming, is essentially pulling all the moisture away from the top end. They're still getting a little bit of monsoonal flow, but once this low in the Gulf moves a bit further east, you'll see that there'll be a definite split between the west and the east in how the flow is presented across the north. The top end, you're looking at 20 to 50 mils, which isn't a lot considering the time of season. You should be seeing the rain, as you should be seeing the rain that we're seeing here in Queensland. And these tropical cyclones that keep forming off the Western Australian coast are going to be problematic for you through to March as well, because March has a lot of western bias signals as well. So this might be a record late season for the top end and a record below average season for the top end as well. And this is with, they're talking up the La Nina type event. It's a neutral event, but we've got copious amounts of moisture in the east, copious amounts of moisture in the west, and unfortunately the Northern Territory is pig in the middle at the moment. And this is the way it rolls this year, unfortunately. A lot of the moisture for the northwest will remain through the Kimberley. The Pilbara will stay fairly dry until this cyclone moves on shore. Heat will begin to build through the west once again, once this cyclone starts to build and starts to pull air down into the gas cone. And then we've got this big ridge that builds in through the bight, which is what's going to drive this system to the west. And you'll see that in the long range maps it starts building heat through this area prior to the landfall. I think my maps are out a few days in the sync, because I do week to week forecasts with the long range maps. The progression's right, but the timeline's slightly off if you look at specific timelines. But with that in mind, you can still build the general picture of how things will play out, despite the dates might being a day or two out of alignment. Tomorrow, Tuesday, focused through the northeast New South Wales and along the coast, mostly coastal, and that's as that upper trough moves offshore that we saw in the wind streamline map. Same thing, coastal heavy rainfall is likely where thunderstorms develop, and there'll be the risk of large to giant hail, especially through northeastern parts of the state of New South Wales into southeast Queensland, through the Darling Downs, southeast Queensland, northern tablelands, and northeast New South Wales. There's remnant storms for coastal eastern Gippsland, but it doesn't look like there'll be much there after today. And some patchy showers for western Tasmania, eastern Tasmania, as this high pressure system in the Tasman there pulls on an onshore flow. This is a large component to what's feeding moisture into this east coast upper trough, this high pressure system down the Tasman there. But that'll all begin to move offshore from the 12th as this peak energy period breaks down. And from Tuesday, we're seeing this low pressure system that's been sitting in the Gulf starting to move offshore of the Queensland coast, and this is when that really intense rainfall should start to rebuild throughout Tuesday into Wednesday. The monsoon itself stays pretty much in place with little change. There'll just be very heavy rainfall to the northern side of the trough, little to no rainfall to the southern side where it's much drier. And then there's this ridge through the interior which is driving this western system to the west. This is that frontal system I was mentioning, and upper low that moves through the southwest in the next few days. There's not a lot of moisture associated with this one, but there is one that moves through closer to the 19th, which will be the key for future movements of this tropical cyclone. So pay no attention to this one yet. It might look good on satellite, but there's definitely no moisture between the north and the south to make anything occur. Wednesday, this is that southern feature moving through the bight. There will be some outflows connected to this tropical cyclone streaming through, but this will be high base cloud. There'll be no rain in that. Storms in the east start shifting in the northeast and New South Wales and further north into the southern parts of Queensland. So, we're looking at the Downs, Granite Belt, parts of the Maranoa into the Wide Bay and southeast Queensland will be thunderstorms. Typical storms for this time of year: hail, damaging winds, and pockets of heavy rain. Rain to 50 to 100 mils with the severe storms. But generally, storms will be less than 30 mils for this area. The heaviest fall should be around that northeastern New South Wales, Coffs Harbour, Port Macquarie, into the tablelands and northern rivers. So locally intense falls and large hail. Yeah, on Wednesday too, we see, Wednesday's the 12th, we see this low pressure system move offshore into the Coral Sea. Again, this can be the tropical cyclone system for the Coral Sea, and you'll see that every time they move offshore, they do develop into a structured, at least tropical low that impacts the New Caledonia region. So this part of long-range forecast remains quite reliable in terms of the tracking of systems and the general hotspot of progressive outcomes. So that's really good to see, and something that we're working on with our modelling that we're building in the background to make the static maps more functional for users in the future. The tropical cyclone is moving closer to the coast by the 12th. Depending on what model you use, they bring this onshore from the 12th to the 14th, which is still within a few days of the long-range forecast specific date range. And various runs bring the low onshore anywhere between the southern Kimberley border with the Pilbara down to Exmouth. The favoured regions, that Port Hedland to Exmouth and around Onslow for a severe cyclone crossing. Very persistent track with this, with the specifically the ECMWF and the Australian BOMS cyclone model. We can put the overlay on for that actually, and that'll give an exact track map with the current Bureau Meteorology outlook. So the Bureau has a Category 4 moving onshore just to the north of Karratha. So this would put Port Hedland right in the firing line of extreme winds. However, I still would expect this would possibly move quite a little bit further south, as far south as Onslow. So there will be a chop and change with this landfall location now over the next few days as we start to see small wobbles in the track. So as the cyclone moves down the coast, you see these little erratic movements between high and, where the steering influences create subtle shifts in the path. So expect this landfall location to move north and south and then to move offshore and then come back onshore. But that's all pretty typical with the computer modelling and how the equations work. The slightest change in point A puts point C, multiple locations differently to previous outlooks. Rainfall for Wednesday will be focused across much of the Kimberley and starting to move into the Pilbara interior, and that'll depend on the location of this low pressure system and tropical cyclone. I would still like to think that this cyclone remains slightly further offshore, and if that's the case, a lot of this rainfall will remain a lot more coastal than what's been shown, These storms through the interior will be quite scattered and very hit and miss. And you can see the rainfall across the top ends quite thin, and that's just patchy thunderstorms. Again, once this western and eastern split occurs, we'll see this area really starting to miss out on rainfall once again. Thursday. Thursday's looking, this is the 13th, so we should have a very definite cyclone crossing idea by this point. Either the cyclone has crossed the coast or is very close to crossing the coast. The ECMWF has, a Cat 3, Cat 4 crossing north of Port Hedland. This would bring a lot of the rain in through Broome into that North Pilbara coastline into the southern Kimberley. The track would still be in pretty much to the south towards Marble Bar. Significant impact. There's not much here. There's the Pardew Roadhouse. These guys have been hit by a few major cyclones over the years. They've only just rebuilt after being hit by a Category 5, I think it was in 2022. It went right over and completely destroyed the place. So they'll be watching this system very closely, no doubt. I still think this track will be further south than what's shown there. But you can see as the cyclone starts to move inland, it starts to pull the monsoon further inland, the rain further inland. And once the cyclone hits the coast, though, we'll see the monsoon trough itself that'll extend up through the Northern Territory start to detach and start to shift north. And that'll put us into a clearing phase, which is part of our long-range forecast. There'll be a monsoon break into the latter parts of February before we build back up again through March. Limited rain through South Australia still. Any rainfall would be closer to the 19th to the 22nd with this next feature. So we really want this to stall a little bit longer than what it's been forecast to do for maximum rainfall effect through the south there. So don't hold your breath for it. However, the timing of this is very important for these South Australian farmers. There's a few light showers moving through Victoria on Thursday. Not much in this. Very patchy storms. If you're lucky, you might get 20 mils, but that's not something I'd be banking on with all the focus on the north and storms, scattered storms becoming less intense through eastern parts of New South Wales and southeast Queensland. These storms are going to be hit and miss until about 20 to 30 mils. Nothing fancy there. And you'll see once this low moves offshore of the Townsville coast from the 12th to the 13th, you'll see that monsoon starting to shift north quite quickly. So this is good news for Cairns south to Mackay, especially that Ayr to Tahlia region that's just been hammered by rain for the last nearly 2 weeks straight. This will be your first opportunity at drying out. Although once the sky's clear, it's going to be very, very hot, very, very humid, and the mosquitoes will be thick. So I don't know which is worse. I think I'd prefer the rain than the heat, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. Friday. Fabulous Friday. So yeah, this cyclone, this current model has the cyclone, once it crosses land, sort of stalling and moving into the Pilbara interior. I wouldn't pay too much attention to this run. Again, I expect it further south and to recurve into the Gascoyne region. So use this part of the forecast with extreme caution. Rainfall will still be biased along this coast down to, say, Exmouth from the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf. However, this rainfall through into the interior will be subject to change due to the exact location of that tropical system. Patchy storms across the north still, and again it'll be determined on how far southwest this low goes to see how much rainfall is robbed from the top end. They're generally just scattered storms. There will be a favourable window as the monsoon does detach from Western Australia and these coral sea systems do move away, there will be a short period where the monsoon does actually engage across the top end between the western system and the eastern system. However, I don't think it's going to be very long-lived, and the Northern Territory people will probably have to wait until the March wet period before they see a proper burst of their monsoon specific to their region. Storms in the southeast again through eastern Victoria into the Riverina and the central districts of New South Wales. These will be pretty patchy, but possibly quite similar to what we're seeing now. There's an upper trough moving through here, through these dotted lines, and that's pulling some of this moisture in from the north. There's an inland trough pulling moisture in from the northern tropics. We've got this high pressure system over New Zealand, so it'll be pulling some moisture in from the Coral Sea. However, this tropical low out here will mostly leave this area devoid of moisture, so storms will be quite scattered and mostly limited to just the evaporation of the moisture that's in the already on the ground rather than atmospheric moisture. Saturday, similar thing, storms progress further to the coast and build a bit thicker through the eastern parts of Queensland. Very hot. So if we get storms through eastern Queensland, these will be favourable to drop the temperature a bit. Hot and humid. The monsoon trough remains through the far north now, and this is where that small window of favourable monsoonal conditions should appear for the top end. And this tropical cyclone, or the ex-tropical cyclone, is likely to be situated down here further south through the Gascoyne, possibly even into the goldfields by now. I still don't think it's going to be moving in through the interior of the Pilbara as far as the ECMWF is showing. But general storms in the east, 10 to 50 mils is quite standard for this time of year. Hit and miss storms, not very widespread, so tending scattered across much of eastern parts of the country. The focus will be rainfall through Western Australia with this decaying tropical cyclone and any monsoonal activity that remains across the top end. And then through Sunday, quite similar. Clearing in the east, not much going on in the east at all. There's a few showers moving over Tasmania, but there'll be nothing of substance there, and then some coastal rain through eastern Gippsland. Not much moving on shore. This is the feature to watch. Again, it should be down further south than that. The further south it can get, southwest, the better the outcome for much of this whole southern area. But you can see the general track as moisture is sheared into South Australia. So if that can be situated further south through here, you can imagine a lot higher moisture levels will be pulled in through South Australia. But I don't expect it to exist into western parts of New South Wales and Victoria. They're still in that drought area through here. And this is the drought area that's been progressing east from Western Australia over the last 18 months. And by the end of this year, I expect that drought area to be right through the southern parts of the southeast and Tasmania. So we'll probably see a very bad fire season this season through much of this entire region, possibly in the southeast Queensland. But we'll cover that in another update. If you want information on the outlook for the season, there is a long-range update on the website that covers this dry progression and general climate outlook for the rest of 2025. So this is accumulated falls from today to the coming Sunday, so 7-day rainfall totals. A lot of this rain up here again is associated with the monsoon, just seasonal rainfall. This pocket of heavier rain for the Pilbara coast should extend further south than shown. This is just one model though, this is the ECMWF. I'll show you several different models for a comparison of different tracks associated with that tropical cyclone. Ongoing heavy rain, 100 to 300 mils plus through the Gulf country and the Cape. This Queensland coast region, we can probably expect another 300 to 500 mils particularly mid this week over the next 2 to 3 days. So this might be underestimated here, and more so rainfall of this calibre to be expected across this coastline. Rainfall in the west, this model only goes to 300 mils, but traditionally with the monsoon attached, you'll be looking at 300 to 500 mils minimum. To the north of the tropical cyclone impact. On the east coast, it's to the south, but due to the clockwise motion, all the moisture and convergence will be to the northeast quadrant. So, and depending on the timing and speed of landfall, these rainfall periods over multiple days can be, 500 to 1,000 millimetres, which is quite common. We saw that in the east coast just with the tropical low. So if we get a slow-moving major cyclone move onshore attached to the monsoon trough, we can expect some major rainfall and significant flood risks alongside extreme winds that cause high levels of destruction. Category 4, possibly Category 5. These sea surface temperatures out here are very conducive for a major cyclone, and this current high energy period is specific for cyclone genesis, and that's why it's formed on the dates that I've said it would form. So that's the EC model. This will be the GFS. Quite similar in its general coverage of rainfall. It's not quite as aggressive with rainfall. However, I'd be looking at higher totals than the lesser totals, particularly for the northern tropics, just because of the time of year it is from experience. Storms in the east, quite widespread accumulated falls, although storms themselves will be hit and miss. So while we see blanket rainfall, it's rarely the case, just due to the nature of thunderstorm activity. However, the potential for, 10 to 100 mils possibly across much of the east by next Sunday is quite high. So if you're lucky enough to be in the path of these storms, you're in for reasonable rainfall. But that's outside of this current thunderstorm period that's occurring now. So a lot of the storms occurring now are producing that intense rainfall over 30 minutes to an hour, which shows that they're quite volatile. The access model, which is the Australian model, it can be a bit bullish on rainfall totals. Load. So this is the previous model run. The current model run won't load, but we see this track with the tropical cyclone is slightly further south. It's got the crossing near Port Hedland with all the rain to the east of the feature itself. So the crossing would be around near the P there of Port Hedland. Rain falling further south into the interior. So this is more so what I'm looking for, but I still expect slightly further to the southwest through the central Gascoyne. Rainfall in the northeast looks quite likely with this more widespread falls to 300 mils. The access tends to overdo rain on a daily basis, but in severe weather events tends to be quite reliable from my observation. So where it's indicating extreme rainfall during high energy periods, use those types of signals with some sort of validity. When we're outside of high energy periods and you see these extreme totals, pay no attention to them. That's how I interpret the access model. And the same thing you can see down south here. It's got quite widespread heavy falls, whereas the potential's there. However, I don't see it being quite widespread as indicated here, particularly not as far inland as it's shown. The other models show most of the rain through the tablelands east of the coast, not so much into the central interior of New South Wales and particularly the southern parts of Victoria. Models are showing, up to 50 mils across Tasmania for the week ahead. They might be a little bit bullish. Tasmania's been quite dry overall for a long time now, so the rainfall for this area is probably over-simulated. So accumulated totals of 10 to 30 mils over the week ahead are probably more likely for Tasmania. The last video today is temperature for the week ahead. Being February, generally we expect high temperatures despite the media, and a lot of the temperature will be focused through the Western Australian interior, particularly as this ridge builds over the next few days, which directs this tropical cyclone onto the Pilbara coast. So you can see that as the cyclone is pulling in this northwest flow, a lot of this heat's moving in through the desert regions of the interior into the western interior. Temperatures up towards 45, possibly higher. And this will be enhanced by this cyclone. It'll be a lot drier to the south of the system. So the last time we saw a tropical cyclone moving along the coast here, I think it was Tropical Cyclone Sean, the heat that built through this area was phenomenal. So I would like to think that we see a similar setup once again. However, with the system then moving in onto the coast and onshore, that excessive heat will be shut down quite quickly. Once moisture starts to move onshore and cloud cover builds. So I expect a lot of heat to move in to the south of this tropical cyclone into the southwestern regions, particularly the interior. And then as this feature recurves to the east, we'll see that heat build ahead of the feature into the eastern states. So if we go over the next few days, we can see with the first frontal system that we're seeing occurring now in the current satellite, there's limited moisture there. So it's just going to direct hot northwesterlies in through South Australia over the next 2 or 3 days. Temperatures into the 40s. So there'll be high fire dangers. And with dry lightning risk, there is a risk of fires through the southern states. We did have fire risk window building into mid-February for much of the south there. So this will see the peak of the dry phase, at least for February, for a lot of the southern states, before we have nationally wetter signals for March. So if we can just get through this period, there is a chance of beneficial rain signals for March for southern areas who have been missing out for a long time. Temperatures on Wednesday, same thing. You'll see the eastward progression of this heat pool. We've got the tropical cyclone moving onshore. Temperatures into the high 40s through South Australia, and mid 40s through the interior. Cooler in the east. This is just due to those storms that are occurring, and you can see that tropical cyclone or tropical low in the monsoon trough moving offshore in the Coral Sea. These cooler pockets will just be due to thunderstorm activity. Very hot through the interior, and to the southern side of the western side of this tropical cyclone, very hot. So you have the wet side and then typically the dry side in a nutshell. That's how they work. I know when Cyclone Debbie crossed the Bowen coast with Sunday Coast a few years ago, they had record rain and flooding to the south, whereas in Townsville it was extremely hot and humid due to the dry air moving in from the Queensland outback. Thursday, that heat anomaly moves in through the western interior of the eastern states through the Channel Country, where there's this hot pocket of air. Generally, temperatures are in the high 20s to high 30s through the northern parts associated with the wet season, and slightly cooler in the south. And that's as this tropical cyclone starts to move onshore, we'll see clouds start to build in through the northwest there, and that ridge starts to break down. This is the ridge moving in through here that steers that system into the west coast. So a lot of that heat will start to push into the eastern states from mid-month. Much cooler on Friday. We've still got temperatures into the mid to high 30s through the eastern states and the northern interior there, but that's quite typical for this time of year. People in this area will be quite used to that. Temperatures into the high 20s to mid 30s for the West Australian region to the south of the tropical cyclone, and generally cooler temperatures for the north, and that's due to that monsoon starting to settle over the Northern Territory and top end. Temperatures into the mid to high 20s, which is quite cool for Darwin for this time of year. Saturday, much cooler, still temperatures into the 30s for much of the interior, standard temperatures for this time of year, and cooler in the southern parts where we've got this onshore flow bringing in cooler airs from the Southern Ocean. Down to 12 degrees, possibly single digits for Tasmania. The mid-teens across Victoria, and the low 20s for the south coast. Should be a nice change from some of the heat over the days before. And then into Sunday, heat builds again in the west. That's due to this tropical cyclone, but that'll depend on the exact path of this system. So this is quite variable. If this features further west, we'll see a lot of this heat staying offshore, and this will all be cloud cover through this part of the state. And we're looking at the next feature moving through within the next few days for the southwest, which would bring rain and storm potential through southern parts of South Australia, Western Australia, but probably washing out in the east by the time it reaches that area.